Okay, this has got to be one of the most embarrassing episodes I've seen in recent memory, coming from Jewish advocacy groups, also Israel advocacy groups, and just people that I know, and but by the same token, people on the other side as well who are blowing this out of proportion. And I mean, last week, for example, I made kind of a 30-minute rant where I said, I'll celebrate Israel and becomes independent in the real sense of the word when they are able to actually dictate their own foreign policy and divorce themselves of a codependent relationship. What did I get for that? There was a guy who basically, a guy who'd been listening to my stream for months, who basically, well, because I didn't condemn explicitly Israel and Zionists and Jews, he basically said that I was, screwing horses or something. And that's the only thing you get for speaking out about this topic. In either case, you're either too far to the side of Zionism and colonialism, or you're some sort of Arab, sheik who is married to 25 women or something. You can't have your own opinion. You can't have your own beliefs, and everything's about bullshit symbolism, and therefore nothing ever gets accomplished, and people just vent and get frustrated over Natalie Portman not accepting some stupid prize in Israel or something. Like I give a shit. And I really could care less. Natalie Portman, is technically, is she still does she still hold the title of Queen of Naboo from what was it, Star Wars Episode 1, Phantom Menace, that awful movie? She can accept a prize or decline a prize, and it doesn't really matter. It's really a symbolic piece of nothing, and I don't see why people are so hung up about it. Hi, everybody coming in here. Sweet Speaks, I never really got back to you. Thanks for tuning in. But look, if you're so pissed off about somebody not accepting an award because of some frivolous political statement, then and you're pissed off because you believe strongly in that cause, your focus is really way off. You don't know what you're doing, and you might actually be working in counter purposes to what you're trying to do. The purpose of promoting a cause is in order to accomplish certain goals, and that's what we were talking about on a stream I was on last week with Halsey English. That once the goal of getting an independent Jewish country was accomplished, Zionism as a whole, the definition has changed, and that's why I don't really consider myself a quote-unquote Zionist. I believe in the sovereignty of all countries. That's true. And if the Palestinians were able to create a responsible and credible leadership, maybe I would support their state too. But it hasn't been happening, and I don't see it happening in the near future. In fact, it's going the other way, and that's why I won't support their cause. And that's why, and also don't forget, people, they want to believe that this issue with Natalie Portman is the most important thing that ever happened. Now, I mean, it was only 1 week ago that some of you same people were saying that it's good that the United States is bombing Syria without a due investigation into the actual causes of the chemical weapons attack and who conducted it. So you rushed to judgment in that case and said, yes, it's time to actually execute a full invasion and attack on a sovereign state, even a sovereign state that we might not like, even a sovereign state that has committed other crimes against its own population. And you're using a knee-jerk reaction many of you, not all of you, to justify an invasion by the United States after we've already been embroiled in conflicts throughout the Middle East, Libya, Yemen, Iraq. We're also involved tangentially in Syria. To some extent, we're involved in Turkey as well because we have troops stationed there. So you had that knee-jerk reaction with regards to what happened in Syria, and now that some celebrity who does not matter in the grand schemes of things has decided, well, I'm not going to accept the prize. Well, now that this is the most important thing, that it's such an insult to you. This is truly embarrassing. It really is, and it would be embarrassing if it only took 2 days for people to finally calm down about it. It's been like 5 days. It's the same. It's the equivalent of what's going on here in the U.S. with Kanye West. Even though I disagree with Natalie Portman, I think she's wrong. But the problem here is that people have to let go of the idea that symbolic causes are really going to advance their community or people or their family. And the Israel advocacy groups and the Palestine advocacy groups can't let go of that fact. And that's one of the reasons that this conflict is not going to be resolved by a mutual agreement, because they both cling to the same symbolism, justified or not. That's up to each person to decide which side is more justified or not. Because objectively, I would say that it's very hard to determine in a conflict who has more of a right over the same piece of land when both of them live there. Okay, I'm not talking about historical context. I'm talking about when both people live there, who has more of a right. It is a difficult decision, and you do have to litigate that. What's up, Lennon McCarthy? Glad to have you. Glad to have you, buddy. And thank you. Always glad to have people from all over the world and all over the spectrum to listen to me. And I wish it was the same way with respect to people, watching this conflict. If I could have Palestinian people onto this channel who would want to present their views and listen to mine, I think it would be a good experience for all involved. And I've had Israeli people on. I've disagreed with them. I've had a pro-Israel Lebanese person on, and I've disagreed with him too. And it's all in the name of creating, discourse where the opportunity to explore new ideas is possible. That's the difference. And when you're talking about advocacy groups, which they do have a role in what's going on. Hey, Mega Man. Hey, vote in red. But wrote red in November. I saw you earlier on ABL Discord. Welcome. So the advocacy groups now, these Israel advocacy groups, are behaving like the Palestine advocacy groups in that a symbolic figure, Natalie Portman, is declining a prize from the Genesis Prize Committee, which is it's a philanthropy organization, and they give it to a Jewish artist, just like there's the NAACP Image Awards, or you have what would you call it? What's the one for Hispanics? I don't. Do they have like a La Raza Award? Whatever. The whole thing is, and that's why I don't care about these ceremonies. I think they're a joke. So she declined that prize, which it would have been $1 million that would go to whatever cause she wanted. And it's her loss, and her reasons for it are irrelevant. Go ahead. If you want to decline a prize, decline the prize. There are plenty of people who would take that prize. It's not the end of the world. These people are flipping out over nothing. It's the same thing that happened when Wendy Williams said, "Well, we don't really need HBCUs. We don't need BET. We've integrated." I mean, I thought that's what integration was for. Well, the entire black media attacked her and said, well, Wendy Williams, we're going to get Chevrolet to drop your sponsorship. So it's stupid. And I'll tell you what, it's really damaging. And I'll show you a story from, let's compare that People love the symbolism here, and the symbolism does nothing because a few years ago, I don't know if you guys are football fans, but I remember during the Super Bowl, Scarlett Johansson did a Super Bowl commercial for SodaStream, which is their company that they sell soda machines basically for the home and office. And she got raked over the coals because it was an Israeli company. She happens to be Jewish, so she said to the people who criticized her, "You can go fuck yourselves. I'll take the money from SodaStream, and I don't care what you think because I agree with SodaStream. I think SodaStream is good." And I agreed with her stance, and it's fine. But did it do anything to solve the conflict? No. Did anything change? No. Did people's lives get better? No. Did SodaStream make more money? Yes. Good for SodaStream. Good for not Natalie Portman, but Scarlett Johansson. And in the case of Natalie Portman, once again, what is so important here? Is she still the reigning queen of Naboo from episode 1? Is that what's important here? Because I fail to see what's important. No, the importance here is that people latch onto these celebrities. And Natalie Portman isn't an idiot, by the way. I look briefly into her background. She does have, I think she studied at Harvard under Dershowitz, who I've criticized plenty, but is a very good criminal defense lawyer. Very good would be like a huge understatement. He's an amazing criminal defense lawyer. Some of his opinions I think are like dog shit, but he's a great civil liberties advocate. He's a very compelling personality. It's important to have, if you can have Alan Dershowitz argue your cause, he's a huge asset. Let me put it that way. Even if you disagree with the cause, because he's an intelligent presenter. Vote Red says, okay. Don't politicize your identity. Natalie Portman causes controversy by trying to avoid controversy. So yes, there's a huge issue right now with people who are normally, they're trying to say that the BDS movement is emotional and they rely on symbolism and they demonize others. Well, you're kind of adopting the kind of stance that a BDS supporter would adopt. BDS, by the way, for those who are not familiar, is the boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement against Israel, which I think is a wrong movement too. I also believe in their freedom of speech. I believe in they have the right to assembly. What I don't agree with is that they go and they shut down other people's events and shout down. They are the quintessential SJWs. They arrive at campuses. I know people who have had to deal with them. I wasn't active on campus in politics at all when I was a student. And they'll go to these events and they'll basically try to deplatform people. That's the same way that as other groups have been doing recently. So BDS, I would have no problem. This is the issue is not boycotting and divesting, which are nonviolent actions and are fine. The issue is that you go and try to force people, compel them to divest, compel them not to sell products in their stores. So therefore, by using this coercive force and coercive action against your opponents, you taint your own cause. And this is what some of these people are pretty much doing with regard to Natalie Portman. Natalie Portman, if she were to reverse course, nothing would change. If she would never have decided not to do this, nothing would change anyway. It's irrelevant either way, whether she accepts the prize, whether she does accept the prize. And Lennon McCarthy it's exactly what I'm talking about. If people want to boycott Israel, that's their right. It's crazy when they want to try to outlaw it. I've said before, these laws are not the way to solve this. You want to know how to promote the cause. If you support Israel, if you want to help your cause, you deal with you present your case, you present your argument, and then you let it up to the public. You leave it up to the public to decide which side of this conflict they agree with more. And if they don't agree with you 100%, then it's because they're not as committed to it as you are. And the reasons why people think that Natalie Portman is such a great spokesman, would be a great spokesman for Israel, are because First of, and they're all superficial. She's very attractive. She's pretty smart, and she's very well connected in Hollywood. She's around the jet set. But then okay, so then by the same token, then you shouldn't, then you should be very then what about Tom Cruise? Has the same set of skills, advocates for Scientology. Okay, so if Tom Cruise advocates for Scientology, does that make Scientology a more legitimate cause? No, it doesn't. I'm sorry. The only way to make it a more legitimate cause is to present the case well and to try to conduct a dialogue that is productive, that does get people to understand that you do have an abiding tie to the region. Boycotts come down. Yeah, I don't know if we're talking about the same thing, Vote Red, but yeah, that's interesting. Okay, so the reasons that I am committed to helping the Israelis are, yeah, they're blood ties. My parents are from there. I still have a cousin. I served in their army. I have a cousin who's a police officer there now. She's only about 19 years old. She's about 5'3", and she's allowed to be a police officer. A young woman, a young Moroccan woman, because my uncle married a Moroccan, and she's allowed to serve there and live in a free country where there's due process of law, and there's at least some freedom of speech. There's not total freedom of speech. I'll probably get some flack by saying freedom of speech there is not as here, and we're losing some of it here too. But they do have some freedom of speech there, and there is a freedom of assembly, and there's a freedom to protest there. What's happening on the Gaza border is not the same as protests. What they're doing is, it's called the March of Return. Very simply put, this is as easy to explain as possible. The March is the government of Gaza, the Hamas government, telling people, you've been ignored for 70 years. Go to the fence, tear the fence down, and take your homes back in Israel, and go and invade Israel yourselves. You, the civilians, should, in an act of basically suicide, breach an international border and forcibly take back your homes from the people living there. Those homes don't exist anymore. Many of them have probably been demolished over 70 years. Some of them lived in other Arab towns that still exist in Israel, and their homes were replaced by homes for other Arab people. You can't restore something that existed 70 years ago now. It's just a fact. It's an issue of maturity, and that's how you present the case. And I'm seeing, by the way, if you want to read about my whole stance on this, I have the article here. I have it on Times of Israel. I recognize some of you might not like Times of Israel, so I did put it on Steemit, and you can vote it up on Steemit, and that's even better. And you have these people. They're just obsessed with celebrity, obsessed with the culture of cliques, obsessed with, and I'm just as guilty of it as you guys are. I'm on a number of platforms more and more every day, and I've been thinking about getting off the grid for a week or so, maybe one day saying, for the next week I'm going to get off the grid. But read this article, and you tell me if you don't agree. I mean, you can look at it from a more detached perspective. If you're not Jewish or Israeli, say, well, I still think he's full of shit. I still think I don't really agree with the Israelis, but I don't think you can disagree with me that when you emphasize too much the symbolism of a celebrity, you do lose the you lose the idea behind the cause. Look at a lot of the causes that were so-called successful. Irish independence. They accomplished an independent Ireland in 1922, and then the country's been poor since then. And it's been poor because it's pursued a lot of, first of all, it doesn't have natural resources. Nothing they can do about that. But they've pursued a lot of policies of social democracy and the welfare state. And eventually they got some capital coming in from their low taxes. But that's only temporary. As their taxes did go up, as that Ireland will probably never be a super rich state. So the cause of Irish independence, once Ireland achieves independence, changes. The same thing with quote unquote Zionism. Zionism is not a cause anymore. I'm sorry to tell you guys. The cause is Israeli sovereignty. The cause is sovereignty for all countries, not just Israel. If you don't believe in the sovereignty of other countries, nobody has to believe in the sovereignty of your country. That's why I stand up so strongly when I talk about UKIP, but I talk about British sovereignty from the European Union. Um, and then people talk about other great causes. What inspired BDS? Does anybody in the chat know what quote unquote inspired the BDS movement? If you want to say that. Yeah, Sweet Speaks, that actually would be a nice idea if you could let me know. Definitely interested. Lenin says, I have respect for some pro-Israel people and some anti-Israel people because it's a complex issue. Well, look, you can't say that the Palestinians are without merit in their complaint. I mean, they did get screwed. Okay, so yeah, you don't have to take a side 100% on one side or the other. Yet you have to come to your own educated and belief system. I would say the Israelis are more justified. I also would say that you can't say to somebody who has also lived in the same country, well, I mean, you should just eat your losses. You have to present a solution, and solutions have been presented. They have been rejected by the Palestinians. The Palestinians do have an almost uncompromised stance on it. That's the way I would say it. So nobody knows what inspired it. Vote in red, that's a valid point, but we're not going to go into that today. Maybe a different time. The reason that the BDS movement, boycott, divestment, and sanctions movement, came to being was because of what happened with South Africa during apartheid. What happened was that there was a boycott in the U.S. It was, I think, across political lines against the regime in South Africa. And some people credit that with bringing South Africa to the negotiation table with the ANC, the African National Congress, and releasing Nelson Mandela. Now, there's a very huge logical fallacy in that stance, and I don't know if any of you will get that. The issue with that with that comparison between South Africa and the Israelis is very simple. That until the boycott, South Africa was not willing to negotiate with Nelson Mandela and the African National Congress. They had this stance that we were able to determine our own path to democracy. We're going to have not one person, one vote. We're going to have a parliament that's elected by white South Africans, and then later they made other parliaments for Indian South Africans, because people forget that there are Indian people in South Africa. And there was another one for biracial South Africans, because people forget that it's not just Africans and white people in South Africa. So there was not one person, one vote until 1994, and that was what ended the boycott. Until then, there was a boycott and there were sanctions against South Africa. In Israel's case, it's the opposite. Israel has been negotiating with Arab countries since the 70s, okay? There were boycotts of them prior to that, but many of them were before 1967, when they conquered the West Bank and Gaza. So in many respects, the boycotts were not against occupation of quote unquote Palestinian land, which at the time was occupied by Jordanians and Egyptians. It was against the very existence of Israel as such. Okay, the boycott originally, which is a different boycott, was the Arab League boycott of the 50s, 60s, and 70s, was against the existence of the country as a whole. Okay, so that boycott had nothing to do with gaining legitimate rights for citizens that were deprived of equality. It was all about strangling the country and eventually defeating it militarily. Economically, they would fall, and then they would be weak militarily. They won't be able to sustain their military. That was the objective of the original boycott. The new boycott, the one that started in the 2000s, I think it was in 2005, started as a result of the stagnation in negotiations during the Second Intifada. The Second Intifada was triggered by the Palestinians in order to force the Israelis to concede more in negotiations that were already happening. So, in Israel itself, the same goal that they were looking for in South Africa already exists. If you're an Arab citizen of Israel, notice I'm saying you're an Arab citizen of Israel. There are people who are born in Israel of Arab descent, and they're able to vote in the elections and in local elections as well, and partake in democracy and serve in virtually any public position, including the Supreme Court and the Knesset and the cabinet. The Knesset is the parliament of Israel. You have those full rights. You have the one person, one vote over there. However, in the Palestinian territories, it's not the same thing. They don't have that right. They actually have their own parliament now, the PLC, the Palestinian Legislative Council, which I think has about 130 members. So, the issue is nothing to do with attaining voter rights. Their issue has nothing to do with attaining better rights in the court of law. Their issue is entirely forcing concessions during a negotiation process that they themselves don't want to take part in. So it's in fact, if you think about it, it's the opposite of what happened in South Africa. And I mean, if you haven't noticed, it's gone pretty bad in South Africa since the end of apartheid. So why would you think that building an entire movement based on what happened in South Africa, but accompanying totally different circumstances would be a just cause? It's a very poor comparison. Okay, the same people who constantly pine, and I'm talking about people who are on the Palestinian side, constantly pine for justice in Palestine. There's the Students for Justice in Palestine. That's a group here in the United States. Or there's the Electronic Intifada. Or you have the International Committee, the International Solidarity Movement. You have a number of these causes, the BDS movement as a whole. They're always talking about getting justice in Palestine. You'll never hear any of these movements or any of their supporting movements call for justice in Nicaragua, which is, the odd thing is, maybe it's not important for you. I think it's important just because it exhibits what happens and serves as a cautionary tale. What happens in Nicaragua right now is a much more dire situation than in the Gaza Strip, because the Gaza Strip, you're talking about people trying to actually breach an international border. It goes without saying that there would be violence if that was to happen. It goes without saying that they would be encountered by military and police forces. If you try to breach the Mexican border right now with a group of 70 people going in there and saying, well, we're gonna claim Mexico, the Mexican military would be fully within their rights to stop you. It's the same with any border. Logically, there's no way that you can say that what's happening on the Gaza border would not end in bloodshed, given what's been happening. And that's just if you would consider them protesters. In reality, many of them aren't protesters. Many of them are armed people who are ensconced within the protesters, or they're launching. I've seen petrol bombs, or they've been burning tires down. That's not peaceful protest. It's something completely different. Those at best would be rioters. And it's called the March of Return. Once again, it's in order to forcefully reclaim land that they claim was taken from them. And if you look at Nicaragua, it makes less sense that there would be violence there. If you have police forces basically beating students on a university campus, that's not exactly that's not just some conflict. You're talking about a civil oppression by a military or police force. That's what's been happening. I mean, I could get you some. Let me see. This wasn't intended to be this long, by the way. But you have, fuck the New York Times. The Pope is calling for it. These are the streets of Nicaragua right now. Okay, and those of you thinking, oh, it'll just blow over or whatever. Well, if it just blows over, I mean, you have people using improvised weapons in order to fight a police force. Okay, so no, this is a real issue. Does the international community care? No. Is Scarlett Johansson or Natalie Portman going to intervene in that crisis? No, they don't care. And that's why symbolic figures are pretty much useless. They don't care. They'll care about something as long as people let them know that it's important. And that's what happened with Natalie Portman. That's what's happening with all these people whining about Natalie Portman too. They're pretending as if Natalie Portman went and accepted a prize somewhere would make something better. It doesn't make anything better. She goes and does the jet set crowd and talks to people and whatever. And some people are impressed, and some people, that their preconceived notions are reinforced, and then people go about their day. There's the same approach happens with who's the other person they send over there? Mayim Bialik, who's also happens to be an Israeli. She's she's the annoying woman from The Big Bang Theory. For those of you that don't remember, when I was a kid, she was Blossom. Much better show in my opinion. So they send her there because she's apparently, I think she's a neurosurgeon, which is good for her. But once again, are you actually changing anything on the ground? Are you going to lead to anything that's going to cause people to change their attitude towards the region? And if the answer is no, if the answer is you're there to show the flag and wave around and say, oh, I'm here to represent Palestine, or I'm here to represent, the St. Louis Cardinals or something. No, it doesn't do anything. It's actually kind of meaningless. And in the grand scheme of things, in 5 years, nobody's going to remember. That's why I brought up the SodaStream issue. Scarlett Johansson took a stand. She said, protesters, you can go fuck yourselves, basically. And she got her money from SodaStream, and SodaStream made plenty of money. And Oxfam lost one of their celebrity advocates, who was Scarlett Johansson. And the world moved on, and we're still alive today. Nothing happened, and we're not better or worse for it. And I'll tell you what, there are exceptional cases where I say, this is a good thing. Radiohead did go appear in Israel, and I said that it was a good thing for a very different reason. And the reason is it's good because Radiohead shows something that's possibly a more important issue, and that's that they are a music performance artist. They're a performance act, sorry. And they go to a place not in order to make some sort of political cause out of it, but in order to perform before their fans, hear from them, talk to them, be connected to their audience, be there for them. The idea that if they did not appear in Israel, that they would somehow change the conflict for better or worse is just provably false, because there are artists that don't choose to go there and nothing changes. It doesn't make a tangible difference. We live in a world where markets kind of determine the course of events, and so do ruthless interventions in countries that we don't belong in. And we have to take a more mature attitude towards it. And that's why these people complaining about. I saw this guy who was trying not to complain about it, but kind of was complaining about it. Couldn't really decide. His name is the Pop Hasid, who is honestly one of the most pathetic people that I've ever watched or heard or read. But he said something correct, and he said in today's increasingly tribal zero-sum world, there's no discussion more tribal and zero-sum than the one surrounding Israel. And then he goes on to say, well, as Portland made Portland just got eliminated. For those of you that don't know, they got swept. I chose not to attend because I did not want to appear as endorsing Benjamin Netanyahu, who was to be giving a speech at the ceremony. In other words, she was not boycotting Israel or even the award. She was refusing to participate in a ceremony the Prime Minister of Israel was attending. It's hardly different than NBA players refusing to meet with a certain president of the United States. So he had to tie it to Donald Trump for some reason. It has nothing to do with Donald Trump. Okay, there are certain things. By the way, if you cut yourself while cutting your nails, it's not Donald Trump related in any way. Those of you that are in the audience, I hope all of you agree with me. It's actually quite irrelevant. And yet, like hungry wolves fighting over scraps of loyalty, the pro and anti-Israel movements have tried to paint her as an enemy of Israel. Israeli cultural minister Miri Regev claimed that Portman fallen like ripe fruit into the hands. So he actually, again, grammar mistake, has fallen like ripe fruit into the hands of BDS supporters. And an admittedly marginal Israel MK called for her to lose her citizenship. Meanwhile, pro-Israel organizations in America like Stand With Us have ripped her apart. And they said, actually, you are practicing BDS. And virulently anti-Zionist blog Mondo Weiss could hardly contain their salivating with the headline, "Come in, Natalie, the water is fine." Because that they want, this is the whole issue, that they recognize that the Palestinian side is entirely about symbolics. They've latched on to people like Ahed Tamimi, who is, her whole cause is that she goes and punches soldiers in the face and then thinks that she isn't going to get arrested. Well, guess what? In the real world, you get arrested. In the real world, you get arrested. It's no different than some frat boy punching a police officer if he's drunk and on a bender on Friday night, after homecoming. It's no different. If you punch a police officer or a soldier, you're going to get arrested, and there's no social justice reason why you can complain after that. J-Man is back. Thank you for tuning in. Bye, Sweet Speaks. So yeah, I think that Pappas had made a couple of valid points here, but this is from a person, by the way, who I mean, I remember this was his post. This is hilarious. I love this one. This is an all, if you guys want, please bookmark this and maybe go there later and give a little comment and something later when the heat's died down. So this was his piece from, I think it was from 2016 or 2015, and it's just about why I blocked you. You want to know why I blocked you? You've called me or texted me or emailed me, whatever way I've still allowed you in. You're my friend. You say, why on earth would I do that? How dare I? I like it when people disagree with me. And then, he just complains. And then he says, my friend, the truth is that we are not friends anymore. Perhaps we never were. Please do not feel hurt, but try to refer what the word means to you. It's a word that has been redefined by Facebook, just like the word like, and turned into a word that now means connection. Does anyone in the world actually have 3,000 friends or even 500? Of course not. No person can handle such a life. But we do have thousands of connections, thousands of personal threads that spread the globe, that span a universe beyond what we can imagine. But the truth is that as our connections grow and the ease with which our connections can communicate with us has grown, the more potential they have to hurt us. You have hurt me. That is in essence and in truth why I blocked you. That is why I can't see you on my newsfeed anymore, in my comments in my block. And more to the point, I didn't block you, but your online identity. Please remember that, because it matters more than you think. So this is a guy, he's complaining about tribalism now. This is a guy who's blocked dozens of people. For some reason, I think he blocked me on Facebook. He didn't block me on Twitter, where I still shitpost him all the time. And this is just this is the attitude of the symbolic SJW community on the Israel side and then on the Palestine side. They have their SJWs and there's SJWs on the Israel side too. And today there was somebody she's a amazing advocate, if you can call that the role, but she is an advocate of Israel. She's a black Christian from the U.S. and she was saying, well, I need suggestions for how to connect a trauma organization. They deal with actual trauma injuries from Israel with inner city caregivers. And she mentioned the ADL, like they could play a role. I said, forget the ADL. The ADL are not going to do anything of substance. And she said, well, and I also suggested three organizations that could have helped, including the Salvation Army. She said, well, I happen to disagree. I said, well, you might want to check out those organizations. What I really should have said is the ADL isn't worth shit, and they're the same problem. And as long as people continue to let themselves be represented by them, nothing's going to happen to help solve anything. Race relations in this country are actually going to get worse if we listen to groups like the ADL and like the SPLC and the NAACP and GLAAD. It's the same. It's the same type of bullshit. Same type of bullshit happening with Natalie Portman is what's happening here. You shouldn't care what these organizations say. You should just be independent and working towards your goal in the best way you can do possible by proposing solutions and looking at actually how to, break the gridlock. That's about it. Mad Dodge says something about Paul Manafort. Yeah, I mean, I don't really care. I mean, Paul Manafort, I think, is not even going to be news in a couple of weeks. Yes, they're going to charge him, and sure. On to the next circus. That's about it. Thanks for staying for my rant, and have a good rest of your day. Please like that article on Steemit. It helps me a lot. And subscribe to the channel and like the video and share the video. And check out the new Comrade Trumpsky episode once Lennon McCarthy has it on. Subscribe to Lennon McCarthy too. Lots of great voices and cartoons.